Welcome back to my channel. So what is a psychological wellbeing practitioner? Well, a psychological wellbeing practitioner, also known as a PWP, is a practitioner that works with people experiencing mild to moderate symptoms of anxiety or depression. So you would typically see a psychological wellbeing practitioner via a referral either from your GP or if you self-refer yourself via into a talking therapy service. So the role itself is about 15 years old, and it came about when there was a guy called David Clark who basically was seeing that a lot of people were taking time off sick, not for like physical health related problems, but more kind of mental health related problems. And it was really difficult to get people back into work because there didn't seem to be any kind of service available to help people that were experiencing kind of depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms. So the idea was to come up with the IAP service, which is the Improving Access to Psychological Therapy service. And basically what this does is it allowed people who were taking time off work, either for stress or for any kind of work-related issues, to actually start accessing a service that could help them get back into work. So that was the initial purpose of why this service came about. But actually over the years it's expanded so much that actually anybody, even if they're not experiencing difficulties with just work, even if it's anything else that they might be kind of experiencing difficulties with, then they can too also receive support. So somebody might have financial situations where they might be in debt that might be causing them to feel quite low or anxious. It might be about kind of dealing with their children, social services. It might even be just dealing with family members, thinking about how their self-esteem is or their confidence is in certain situations. And it's things like that that the service has really expanded out to people with any kind of difficulties that they're experiencing that are kind of showing that they're mild to moderate. The PWPs would be able to work with them. Now, psychological wellbeing practitioners can be seen according to kind of the step care model. So it's not really interesting to know about the step care model unless you're really aware of kind of the different services available, but it's just helpful to know kind of where we sit on the scale in terms of getting access to psychological services. So previously, psychological services were really difficult to obtain, like seeing a CBT therapist or a psychologist. You know, you'd have long waiting lists, perhaps from about 6 months up to even a year to see a psychologist or even a CBT therapist. So it was about bringing in a practitioner that was easy to access. And even whilst you're waiting to see a psychologist or a CBT therapist, it would be about kind of obtaining access to kind of low-level self-help or guided self-help materials, which you can start building your foundations with. So then when you do come to kind of meeting a CBT therapist or a psychologist or even a psychiatrist, you would have like a basic understanding of kind of your mental health and what makes you feel good, and also your triggers as well. So the step care model works on a 5-scale basis. So you start at the bottom where you've got step 1, and that's your initial access into psychological services. So it might be that you go to your GP or you access a self-help kind of referral form online where you basically refer yourself to a service to show that you want that support. So if you went to your GP would probably have those conversations about what's been difficult for you, and then they might recommend talking therapies to you, so they would then get in contact with us, and then we would contact you with like a first appointment, an assessment appointment is what we call them. The second step is when you've actually been admitted into a talking therapies service. So it would be that you start having your first kind of assessments and treatment sessions with your psychological wellbeing practitioner. Now, seeing a psychological wellbeing practitioner means that you can have lots of different ways to access psychological therapies. So you can do it one-to-one on the telephone, one-to-one face-to-face. You can attend groups where there's other people that might be feeling the same way as you are, so you don't feel isolated. There's also computerized CBT, which is kind of working on the computer, doing modules and things like that. And psychological wellbeing practitioners would also put you in touch with kind of materials that you could actually read if you prefer to kind of work alone. Now, a lot of the interventions that the PWP use are actually based on cognitive behavioural therapy, which is basically looking at your cognitions, which are your thoughts, and your behaviours, which are the things that you act on or the things that you do, and how they're linked together and how we might be stuck in kind of a vicious cycle. So we're not actually working with CBT completely just on its own, we're working with the principles of CBT. So looking at a structured approach, focusing on the here and now, being very goal orientated, and like I said, looking at how our thoughts, our behaviours and also our feelings and physical symptoms are all linked together to kind of maintain our mental health. So step 3 of the step care model is working with more kind of a CBT therapist, so somebody who's able to kind of dwell more into what you've been through in terms of your experiences, perhaps looking at your past experiences, but mainly focusing on how they have actually impacted on how you are today. And also kind of focusing on kind of your more core beliefs. Additional to that, you might be in touch with a primary mental health care practitioner or some other practitioner from the mental health primary care services. Usually the people that access this service are experiencing moderate to severe signs of depression or anxiety, but it's not always necessarily the case. You know, there are some areas where we can see people at different levels. It just depends on what your complexities are, and each person is seen as an individual. The next part of the step care model is step 4, which is working with kind of more mental health specialists, and that might be people like consultants or psychologists. And then you're kind of also working with perhaps a crisis team. So it might be someone who's got kind of a significant risk to themselves or to somebody else, and that have either been kind of resistant to past treatments or have had recurrent episodes of kind of anxiety and depression, where they haven't found much treatment effective at all. It's also kind of people who are atypical, and it might also include people who are actually feeling psychotic as well. So the last step of the step care model is step 5, which is looking at kind of either the crisis team or looking at inpatient hospitals where you're actually admitted for care. And that might be because you've got a significant, an even more significant risk to your life than someone at step 4 or to others. And it might include kind of self-neglect and things like that. Now, all of these levels are worked in terms of access to psychological therapies. It's not about kind of one practitioner being better than the other, because every skill is used in a different way at each level. So being assigned to each of the steps really depends on kind of the person's presentation and symptoms and kind of what they're going through. If they're quite complex, then they might see somebody at step 3 or step 4. If they've got kind of difficult issues that they want to deal with at this moment here and now, then they might see somebody at step 2 or step 3. So it really just depends on each individual person, and that's why an assessment is taken place at the start of that kind of step care model, perhaps at step 2, to be able to kind of find out exactly what their goals are, what they want to work with, what is it that they want to gain from treatment, to be able to then understand where in the step care model that person would fit. So going back to the psychological wellbeing practitioner role, those practitioners are actually based mainly in surgeries or in hospitals where they've been given kind of a room or an area to work from where they are able to see clients, because it's all about making it accessible for people in the community. So it's usually that there's a certain base in your community where a psychological wellbeing practitioner will be situated. Now, the main interventions that psychological wellbeing practitioners work with depend on kind of what it is that the client wants to work with, and you usually have those collaborative discussions with the practitioner before starting treatment. Treatment sessions usually last around 4 to 6 sessions, depending on what the client wants. Sometimes it can be less than that if they feel that they've made a quicker recovery, but there's no obligation for that client to stay within treatment the entire time. But obviously there is some sort of level of commitment therapy that should be there for someone to actually make the effort and want to kind of commit to the out of session work and the homework that's involved, that the PWP and client would actually discuss doing. So aside from kind of doing the interventions, the PWP would also work with somebody who might need kind of signposting to different kinds of areas, somebody that might need bereavement services for dealing with loss, they might need financial support, they might need to get in touch with social services, or they might even need employment support. So it's about being kind of a person that can kind of direct that client into the right direction for the services that they feel that they need, that the psychological wellbeing practitioner can't directly support them with. It's also helpful to know that all the interventions that are run by the psychological wellbeing practitioners are all evidence-based. So there's always some kind of research available that's shown that actually what we do as practitioners with clients is really good for recovery and has actually had really good outcomes for people who have been experiencing mild to moderate symptoms of depression or anxiety. This is because essentially what the PWPs are helping their clients do is to build kind of a toolkit. So it's about having a toolkit with all the tips, tricks and strategies that you need to kind of deal with whatever life throws at you. So it might be that if you're dealing with kind of a difficult workplace, maybe a difficult boss, or even some difficulties at home, you might have lots of self-esteem or confidence issues, and you might have lots of negative automatic thoughts. So it's about kind of putting certain kind of strategies in place to be able to challenge those things, because sometimes it's about not really changing your situation or circumstances, because sometimes that's not possible, but the way that we can approach it and actually change our perception of it can actually be achieved. So I guess this brings me to the end of today's PWP video. I hope you found it helpful. If you've got any more questions about anything that I've mentioned in the video, or anything that I haven't mentioned in the video that you would like to know about, don't forget to comment below, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye. So the role is... There's a kid outside that's screaming. And each person says...